With no builders on site, this has been the first week in a long while when I've been up here on my own. I've mostly been working towards a key objective in relation to the level of the ground floor, but I have managed to squeeze in a fun day away from the house. This is what I've been up to. Megalithic dolmen. This week I've been continuing my work digging out the ground floor and turning my house into a bit of a quarry. And as a quick reminder as to why I'm doing this work, there are two main reasons. The first is that I'd like there to be a lot more space between the floor and the ceiling in this section of the house. And the second is that I'd like the whole of the ground floor to be at the same level without any steps between it. But to achieve this, I'm going to need to take out between 45 and 90 centimeters from all of the area underneath the vaulted ceilings. I am looking into what tools and machines I could borrow or hire to do this work, but for now I'm doing most of the work by hand. And this week I'm going to be doing that work in this room, partly because it's a little bit easier to get the material outside. But first up, I need to clear the path for the wheelbarrow from the entrance of this doorway here through to the outside. All of the rock under the house is shale, and it's found in a whole series of layers or seams, and those seams are at an angle roughly in line with the slope that the house is on. And there's actually quite a surprising difference between the seams. Some of them are made up of very thick rocks that when you break into them come out like great big square edge bricks. Others come out like very thin slates, and other seams are almost soil-like in their structure, and when you break into it, it comes away very easily. There's a basic three-part cycle to this work. The first part is to break up the surface, ideally into as large a pieces of rock as possible. The second is then to pick the material up off the floor and get it into the wheelbarrow. And the third part is then to get the material outside in the wheelbarrow and put it down somewhere where hopefully I'll be able to use it reasonably easily in the future. So I found that by putting down some wooden boards and then scraping the material onto the board, it's a lot easier to pick up with a big shovel and get it straight into the wheelbarrow. I started off nearest the doorway, so it was easier to get the material out. But this first corner that I was working on was proving a bit of a nightmare. It combined seams that were made up of sort of soil or clay that was very fiddly to get out, and then some very, very hard bits of rock that took forever to break up. The middle seam through the room was probably the best one here because I could see the seams quite clearly. I could break into them reasonably easily, and the end results tended to be the big square edge rocks that I was looking for. Once I have managed to excavate all the rock from the floor, I'll then need to add a lot of concrete both to the floor and then all along the bases of the walls. And at this stage I've been advised to leave about 30 to 40 centimeters of rock around the edge of the walls until the last minute when I'm actually then going to put the concrete along the base. I'm being fairly conservative and leaving a lot more than 50 centimeters at this stage, but I think that's the best way to do when there's no one else around. And then working on this seam against the wall was a fairly mixed experience because it's quite difficult to get into. And some of the rocks coming out in a good size and other parts were breaking up into very small material that was much more difficult to pick up. To help explain why some of the work and some of the seams are so much harder to work on and taking so much longer, I've started to apply a rating system called Hugo's Quarry Score. It's a rating system of 1 to 5, with 5 being good, and 5 is where a seam can produce great big rocks with square edges that I can break into reasonably quickly and lift out reasonably easily. And 1 is my nightmare seam, where the material probably can't be used and it takes ages to chip away at it. There were 1 or 2 seams in this room that were producing very good slate rock, so very thin layers, that I've tried to put to one side so that I can use them more easily for some of the plans that I have in certain parts around the edge of the house. Another analogy to help explain this work is that it started to feel a bit like fishing, with the first couple of taps of the pickaxe, a bit like when you get a bite on the end of the line, and then you got the feeling that it might be a really big one that you were about to land, and so then you started to be really careful about how you chipped away at it. And then eventually, when you did manage to lift it out, it was a bit like when you land a really big fish. It's now the middle of the week, and after 2 reasonably successful days of quarrying in this room, I think it's a good time for a break from the digging, both for me and for you. And with the sun shining outside, It's a good time for a trip away from the house. And the trip that I'm planning, which I hope matches some of the requests from my last video, relates to the view through that door and the hills that you can see in it. Because one of my favourite things about the house is the forest all around it and the various interesting things that you can find, especially when you go on a bicycle around the various tracks and paths within it. And so today I'm going to cycle to the furthest point that you can see from the house in that direction, which is the highest peak in the whole of this hill range. And in a straight line, it's probably about 10 kilometers. But to get there, the route is neither flat nor straight. The first bit of the route that I'm doing today is on the road above the house, which is actually quite flat, but has got a lot of bends in it. But pretty quickly I'm moving on to a dust track, and this one, like quite a lot around the hills, is maintained all year round and you can drive a car on it pretty easily. To help you understand whereabouts I am on the route, especially in relation to my house, I'm going to pop up the photo of the view from my house and show an arrow as to where I am at that moment. I'm now on the track that runs along the ridge at about the level of my house on the other side of the valley, so it's quite easy to see my house from here. I'm now going onto a track that is definitely not maintained for using a car on, and it's fine for walking, and normally it's good for cycling, although there can be some hairy moments because the surface is fairly uneven and it does get quite steep. This track's actually going through an area of cultivated cork trees, which are fairly typical of the area. Behind me is one of the first ruins on my route. You'll get a better look of it from the other side of the valley, so I'll try and look back. This one's called Mas Gorch. There are still quite a few old houses that have been abandoned and left as ruins in this whole area, and it tends to be where they were in particularly inaccessible parts, either at the bottom of the valley or on top of hills that are hard to reach. And now, having gone downhill for quite a long time, I'm almost at the bottom of the valley, and like most of the valleys in these forests, they tend to have little streams running along them, and at this time of year there's still a fair bit of water in them. When you do go off the slightly bigger tracks that are maintained for cars, you do end up having to go up some fairly steep hills on tracks that are very rough and uneven, but pretty fun if you've got the heart for it. There are a number of houses that have been kept going, either by locals that have retained them over generations, or some that have been bought by foresters who have then done them up a little bit, and then some houses like these ones coming up have been bought by outsiders like myself and then renovated either for permanent residences or for holiday homes. Behind me is one of the houses that you can actually see from my house about halfway to the horizon line, and actually from here you can see my house over there. And this is the second house that you can see halfway up the horizon from my house. This one's called Can Barcelo. This is a restaurant called Els Metges, which I think means the doctors in Catalan. And it's not open midweek, just at the weekend, so I won't be able to buy any food here, but I will have a seat underneath that tree and have a bit of a snack. And it's right next to this old church, which is Sant Cebrià, and it's about midway between where I'm going to the top of the hill, Puig D'Arques, and my house, which is back over there. And then all these beautifully shaded tables all have a view back out that way. Someone else has joined me, pretty keen for the sandwich that I'm having. Hello. Hello. After finishing off my sandwich with my two new friends under here, I'm now going to go and have a look at the church. There are quite a few aspects of this church which are very similar to the one next to my house, especially the vaulted ceiling here, the little side chapels, and then the front altar. It's obviously a lot smaller, and it might be about the same age as the original part of the church next to my house, but I don't know that much about this one. And I don't actually know if they have any services here. I think they probably don't. I just had a quick chat with the owner of the restaurant, and while they're not open, he has agreed that I can go in there quickly to film the inside so that I can show you what it looks like. So you come into this entrance here, which has got this very cool little bar, just the one beer on tap, good local Estrella Damm, and then one of the dining areas, which is very authentic, very old school. Beautiful old wooden door. And I believe through that way is the kitchen. And what I love about this room in particular, they've got this three-dimensional map of this whole range of hills which the house is in and which I'm cycling in. And then there's another dining space through here with some slightly bigger tables for big groups, with a good old fire down in the corner there for winter time in particular. And then a slightly smaller, more private little space in here. And that's it. It's very small, nice little bar, a couple of seating areas indoors, and then a nice seating area outside in the summertime. But it's a real cracker if you can find it. Time now to get back on the bike and get up the big hill in that direction over there. The foresters in the area are busy most of the year, but spring is a particularly busy time, especially as they look to clear away all the undergrowth in various areas to minimize the risk of fire during the summer. These guys, I think, were actually cutting down a whole series of eucalyptus trees on the side of the track. The point that I'm heading to is called Puig D'Arques, which roughly translates from the Catalan of the Mount of the Arcs. As I said earlier, it's the highest point in the hills, and it's about 520 meters above sea level. It's particularly easy to see because it's got this big white spherical dome on top of it, which is actually a weather station for predicting what weather is incoming to the area. And this is the reason I've come up here. A 360-degree view of pretty much the whole of Girona province. So down there, about there, is my house. Across there is where I just stopped for lunch. And in between is where I've cycled today. And this is just about my favourite spot in the whole area because you really can see everything. So I'll switch the camera around and talk you through what you can see from up here. First of all, there is my house, or at least the church and the vineyard in front of it, which in combination means that you can pretty much see it from miles around with the right angle. And if I move slowly around, although it's very cloudy and hazy on the horizon, you can just about see the Pyrenees mountains with some snow still left on their peaks. And they are, I guess, 60 kilometers behind Girona and behind my house. And then here's a bit of a look at a couple of the villages and the main town in between my house and the coast. A couple of those medieval villages are the ones that I visited on bike a few months ago. And there are maybe 20, 30 other little medieval villages dotted around below. And I'll probably do a bike trip and have a look at some of those in the future, as well as going all the way down to the coast that you can see there, and the little islands which are called the Illes Metges. And here's a bit more of a zoom in on my house and the church. I'm not quite sure how clearly it's going to come out, but hopefully you'll be able to see it well enough. And then moving to the left of where my house is, there is another mountain range on the horizon, of which the big peak is through there in the clouds, and that is Monsen, and that is about 850, 900 meters above sea level. And then a little bit further up through that gap, if you drive through there, you reach Barcelona in about 70 minutes. And having shown you the view from up here, I'm now going to head back to the house over there, and rather than come on the forest route on the way that I came, I'm going to drop down the side of the mountain and cycle around, which is a slightly flatter but a slightly longer route. And on the way I'll stop off on a couple of places to show you some interesting things. And the first thing I want to show you is actually before I get back on the bike, because it's just around the corner here, below the viewing tower that we've just been on. This is a stone structure from a few millennia ago. It is a megalithic dolmen, and I'm not exactly sure of why they were constructed here. I believe it was either for some sort of religious or ceremonial function, but it would have been a heck of an effort to bring all of these big stones up here, especially that big one on the top, and makes my work in the back room of my house look fairly basic in comparison. When I was on the dolmen just now, I had meant to say that there are a lot of other dolmens dotted around the hills, and there are actually a lot of other structures dotted around that are slightly more recent, whether they were for mining, for ice, or for water power. This church here is the centre of not really a village, but at least a hamlet of houses that have always been kept up to date and mostly lived in. And this little area also has a beautiful restaurant here with a great view on the horizon. And then it has got quite a few holiday homes dotted around. So it's one of the few villages in the hills that's remained a little bit more active. Like all around these hills, as soon as you start to move into the slightly less steep terrain, the forest starts to give way to farmland. And most of these fields are attached to old farmhouses or massia that tend to have been held by the same family for many generations. One of the reasons I'm coming back this way is that it's one of my favourite cycling routes, and it's actually an old railway line that runs from the coast to the city of Girona and then further up into the hills beyond. And it was discontinued, I think, about 30-40 years ago, but has since then been maintained as a footpath or a cycling path, and it's a great way to see the countryside. This is one of the many old train stations along this route, the majority of which have been kept in pretty good condition and are now used for a variety of different things. The section that I'm on here runs between two of the towns that are very near my house. The first one I'll just pass through, and the second one I'm going to stop off at. And now I'm heading to the final stop along my route, and this is actually the nearest town to my house, albeit there's a fairly large hill in between the two. And this is an old theatre that is now a community restaurant or cafe and is incredibly popular, not least because they do a great range of very good value food, and they've got a very good bar as well. I've been looking forward to a non-alcoholic beer for about the last hour, and I was looking forward to it so much that I decided to order two to start with. Cheers. The non-alcoholic beer was very refreshing, and the big slice of cake or tart that I had was delicious, and hopefully they'll provide me with a good amount of energy for my last cycle of the day as I head up the hill in that direction to get back to the house. There are a few shops in the old centre of this town and then more on the outskirts. And then in this next square, there is a market twice a week with fruit and vegetables and other items. This final hill up to my house is very popular with cyclists from all around Girona. but not many of them have to do it at the end of a day to get home, having cycled around the mountains for the previous few hours. After the bike ride, I was back digging up rock for the next 2 days of the week, although I was only able to do so for a few hours, especially on the second day. I'm sure you've had enough quarrying in this video, so rather than share all of the work I did, I've edited it right down to show some of the bigger, more impressive rocks that I lifted out and the overall progress that I made. And that is the last load of the week, as I'm out of time for the day. I haven't quite finished in that back room, but I have made pretty good progress, as you would have seen from the clips. And I've added a lot of material to this pile, including some of the good rocks up there. But I hope to finish that room off next week and hopefully get on to some more other interesting tasks as well. So I hope to see you then.